Let's go to Australia. Alan Quinlan, good morning to you. How you doing?
Morning, lads. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Have you travelled to Sydney yet?
Yeah, I'm here in Sydney. I came here last night, so it's the weather's not getting any better, Ger. Unfortunately, you think it's you think of Australia, you think sunny weather, but unfortunately, it's their winter. We have a bit of a storm in Sydney today.
Right, class.
Not good.
A couple of things we want to talk to you about: the All Blacks and the red cards. Benjamin Fell's red card has been overturned overnight in this part of the world, obviously across the day for you guys, and it has just reached epidemic proportions where all the refereeing decisions always go to New Zealand. And it's so weird because this is a team that doesn't need the refereeing decisions to go their way, and yet they do. Now, it's okay for us, I think, to make these points now, but you just know that come November when Ireland play them, there's going to be high tackles, there's going to be non-properly wrapped tackles, there'll be offside, and there'll be a bunch of decisions that the All Blacks get because that's what happens for some reason.
Yeah, you get that feeling when you play against them. I've played against them a few times as well, and that sometimes referees are a little bit intimidated by them. About the aura of playing against or refereeing against the All Blacks. And yeah, look, I think they're quite abrasive and aggressive and very physical the way they play. And I suppose you go back to that game in November in 2016 when there was couple of unsavoury incidents. There was a couple of offsides that kind of could have affected the game in a more positive way for Ireland, and they just go their way. So it seems to be a recurring theme. Last week's incident with Remy Grosso, I think that sent out the wrong message. Look, I don't think there's huge intent in there, but when you go in with that shoulder drive into a side of a player, I know the level of the height of the player is going at. If you cite or suspend or do something about that from World Rugby's point of view, it'll stop people diving in with the shoulder, and we're talking about helping people and protecting people, particularly around concussion and head injuries, and that just sent out the wrong message. So I think they made a major mistake there. I don't think, look, the player came out and apologised afterwards, but Remy Grosso's gone off with 2 fractures in the side of his face, and it's wrong. It was handled wrong. I think the incident at the weekend, it's a hard one for Angus Gardner. I think it possibly, it possibly is by letter of the law a red card, but I don't think there's any intention there. And, it's been deemed now to be, not, it's by the citing committee and the judicial committee afterwards that it's not a red card. So it's a bit of a strange one again. That one was harder to judge because you're talking about, player intent, and there was obviously intent from Benjamin Fall, but certainly the player comes down on the back of his head, and by the letter of the law, it's a red card.
Yeah, so they're saying that there's a dunt from the other New Zealand player before Fall tries to jump, and that's what sets him off balance, and that's what sends him into Barrett. I'm less concerned about the nuances of getting that decision right than the fact that they were intent on applying the letter of the law, that they actually went and carefully reconsidered every single available angle to them, whereas the previous week it was like, no, that's grand, off you go. Oh, he's got a broken face. Well, that's a pity, off you go, it doesn't matter. It's like this kind of weird sense of we have to hyper-police whatever injustice is done towards New Zealand, but that we're actually not really going to look at that too much when it is New Zealand. Now, maybe this is just the way that we look at it because we've seen it so often, and maybe, I don't know, we have a weird sense of paranoia around this, but it seems to me like New Zealand are refereed differently from everybody else.
Yeah, I think, look, last week's decision was wrong, I think, and World Rugby made a major mistake. I think if Benjamin Fall gets 2 or 3 weeks suspension this time, there wouldn't be as much uproar about it. There would be sympathy because there was mitigating factors, and that's what the panel found, that he got pushed. His eye was on the ball all the time. But there's certainly, there's a lot of decisions. And like I said, Jerry, I played against him a couple of times, and you just get that feeling that you have to have a blatant penalty to get one. But they're outstanding rugby players, to be fair. And, Steve Hansen's come out on the weekend and he said, look, there needs to be maybe some sort of, I card that reports a player when they're involved in one of these incidents. And they had sympathy for Benjamin Fall. It's easy in hindsight to say that. John Kerwin spoke out about it, that it ruined the game as well from a spectator's point of view. But the big problem is the week before. That was wrong. There was time to look at that. It was a shoulder straight into the side of the face, and it's sending out the wrong message about safety in rugby, and they really got that one wrong. But I don't think we're going to hear the end of that one. I think that one is going to crop up again, and I think it may be looked at, and World Rugby might have to come out and make some sort of a statement or a proper, more detailed explanation as to why they didn't take action.
I hope so. I hope we haven't heard the end of it. Before we get on to Ireland, I want to talk about Eddie Jones as well. He's 5 games in a row they've lost now. This again, they put themselves in a winning position with 2 early tries against South Africa. The RFU are laying off a massive amount of people because they're short on funds, but they've ring-fenced 30 million to continue to prepare the senior international team. In fairness, that is their cash cow, and that's where the majority of their cash is coming from. So that's what they're talking about. They've backed Eddie Jones with a terse cursory statement. The Telegraph has gone to the pains to point out that it's not a ringing endorsement of him. Is it 50-50 that Eddie Jones is still the England coach come the next World Cup, or is he a bit more secure than that?
No, it's 50-50. I think there's pressure on. I think go back to the Six Nations and speaking before to some ex-internationals, English internationals before the England game, and there was a little bit of discontent coming out of the camp that, they're being overtrained and physically the sessions are very draining. It's quite, at times, a bit of a hard place to be, that it's relentless. And, look, we've heard some of that stuff from Joe Schmidt, about Joe Schmidt's teams, that it's get your game face on when you drive into Carton House, and it's, about the detail and preparing for the game. But I think Eddie Jones, you either like him or don't like him. There's probably no middle ground. I think he's a good coach, but I think he's certainly, there's rumours that he's losing the dressing room a little bit, and there's a lot of chopping and changing. But in turn, Rassie Erasmus, he's done a fantastic job. I watched the game last week with Donald Lenihan, the first 20 minutes, and we said, oh God, that wasn't been a good choice for Rassie to go back to South Africa. And then we started staring at each other for the rest of the game, going, what the hell is going on here? England are just, they look a little bit unhappy, they look frustrated, they look narky, they look under pressure. They're making a lot of bad decisions on the field. They still have a lot of talented players, but their discipline is really, really poor. And honestly, cannot believe there are some of the penalties they're giving away. And I know I was good at them myself when I played, but some of them are really, really basic, and it's hurting the team, and it's costing them in crucial areas. And all is not right there. But I think it is 50-50 now because, England rugby is such a massive organisation that they either have to make a decision pretty soon, because you don't want to be going into the start of this season looking at, we're 12 months out from a World Cup, and if the results started going poor in November, it'll be hard to build it back up again for a World Cup.
Yeah.
But look, I just think they're going through a bad period. I think he needs to circle the wagons. He needs to get people on side, players, management. He needs to keep a bit of unity, and winning becomes a habit as well as losing, and there's massive pressure on them. They've lost the series, but they've got to try and win on Saturday against South Africa and get some positives. Now, there's a lot of players injured. A lot of players he had to leave at home. Billy Vunipola has broken his arm again. That's not good news for him. But I think it's 50-50.
Yeah, fair enough. Let's move on to the Ireland game. A much better performance from Ireland. Still a few bits and pieces that they'd want to work on, and no guarantees heading into the third test given the injury toll after the second one. But a vastly superior performance in the key aspects of the game, which really set the platform for victory.
Yeah, look, the stat that jumps out that we mentioned last week is 21 turnovers. If you lose the ball that often, whether it be at the breakdown, loose kicks, knock-ons or whatever, it's going to have a big say on the result in the end. And this week it was 9, and that's a figure that you can live with. There's always going to be a loose kick. There's always going to be a couple of knock-ons, a couple of little errors and mistakes here and there, but it's way down. 21 last week was way too high, and You know, Australia missed 34 tackles as well. That came from relentless pressure from Ireland. This was probably the true Ireland team that we saw, the team that were Grand Slam winners a couple of months ago. Sexton coming back into the team was magnificent, and he just seems to put pressure on guys around him. Ringrose was really good. Tyke Furlong. Scannell did really well. I think a few eyebrows at his selection, but he played well. And Devin Toner as well. He doesn't get the credit sometimes he deserves. He was fantastic, as were the other guys. James Ryan, again, it's unbelievable watching him. He's so intelligent, makes so many good decisions. And then the back row, Peter O'Mahony, the 3 huge turnovers, and Stander was really good. Levy unfortunately had to go off, but then Jordy Murphy comes on and makes a real statement again. So the platform they laid on for Conor Murray was phenomenal. And like I said about stats, Jerry, you can't win a game with 30% possession, 35% possession 2 weeks in a trot. They won it last week and they just couldn't do it again, Australia. You can't just have that little ball and expect to win a game. Now, it's crazy in a sense that the last couple of minutes of the game, Ireland are hanging on and it's squeaky bum time. Ireland should have been so far ahead there, and that's down to different factors of maybe not taking their chances when they had them, and certainly refereeing decisions as well.
Stephen Ferris was saying on Sky Sports, as I'm sure you heard, Alan, that Ireland out-Pococked Pocock. Is that a mental shift from Ireland, or is that a tactical thing? Is there anything tangible that they did on the ground there that you noticed that made all the difference?
Nothing tangible, just way more urgency out of everyone. I think it can happen on when you're... and it's not just your back row, it's throughout the team. I saw Ringrose, Henshaw just blasting guys out of the way, Earls, Rob Carney secure all. Just their urgency to get around each other and really secure the breakdown. Now, when you play against those guys, you have an extra kind of edge and an extra nervousness, if you like. And the whole team are just fantastic at that. And they play a lot together. And this is one of the hallmarks of why Ireland have been successful, because their breakdown is good. And it's a real kind of strength of any team that Joe Schmidt coaches. He puts massive emphasis on technique, removing the threat really aggressively, and they were superb at that. The surprise was it didn't happen last week, the week before. There was a little bit of, that was down to Australia being dominant themselves and their carries. And sometimes negating the threat of the breakdown isn't just about cleaning out, it's about the ball carrier, his attitude, his body position, staying on your feet for a second or two if you are a little bit isolated, but also doing that wriggle on the ground where you're fighting and twisting and turning, and it just buys you a second or two. So from a technical point of view, they were really good. They've got to do that again this week and, build the same kind of pressure. And I think Michael Cheika says he wasn't surprised, but I think the Australian public were surprised, and the ex-Australian players, I think, they thought Australia were going to get much better, and they fancied their chances. None of them gave us a chance on Saturday. I was quite surprised. And they don't know a lot about the Irish players, which is another situation that kind of annoys me. But if Ireland win on Saturday night and win a series, they'll certainly know about them for a while down here.
Yeah, it sounds like you're making us favourites heading into that last game.
I'm not. I think it's 50-50, Ger. I think, look, they will... I think Michael Cheika picked the same 23. There's a couple of guys, I don't know if they'll start. Caleb Timu was ineffective. There's talks that Tuhi will come into the back row. Tupou was very, very good at tight head when he came on. He made a lot of fair impact, the guy who got the try. Latu was very good when he came in at hooker. So I think he'll make changes. Not so many in the back line, but I think he needs to get a little bit of a dynamic presence up front, a little bit more aggression. Look, they did it the week before. There's no reason why they can't. The reality is, if they don't front up against Ireland, they know it now. They've experienced it firsthand. But I think Ireland can get better from this. And it was interesting listening to Conor Murray today. They don't want to let this one slip. There's a real belief in this team. You think back 2 years ago, Jared, they won in South Africa for the first time in history. They beat the All Blacks a couple of months later for the first time. They've beaten Australia for the first time in 39 years. They've won 2 championships, a Grand Slam. This team just keeps achieving, and it's phenomenal. A lot of that is down to character and belief as well. Of course, you have to have the quality, but they believe now that they can go and win a series. That will help them. But I think, look, it is 50-50. Australia are very dangerous, and I think they have issues about holding onto the ball and building pressure because, like I say, on law of averages, you can't win a game with 60, 65, without 60, 65% possession. And Australia have had to do that 2 weeks in a row, and they got punished for it this week. And they had no line breaks. They had one line break in the game. Ireland had 8 clean line breaks. So Ireland were just setting the tone. Their execution was so much better than the week before. And but look, they've got to maintain that and try and improve on that this week again.
Last question for you is about team selection. There's been a sense of some mild experimentation up to this point. Is there any possibility, any room for experimentation, or is it full team, full board? Like, do we see Cooney at 9, for example, to start a game, maybe? Or is this too serious now that the whole series is in the melting pot and actually you just pick your strongest team?
For me, you just pick your strongest team, Ger. It's a series win that you're trying to get here. Look, I think it's in an ideal world you'd love to have won the first 2 and be completely change over the third, but it's not possible. I think he's got to pick the strongest team. I think maybe a little bit of rotation. I think Jack Conan may feature somewhere from the start. Ian Henderson might come back into the team. Will Bundy Aki feature again at 12? I'm not sure, but Ross Byrne is the only player in the squad who hasn't got got any action, which is tough on him, I think. But he will have learned a lot being involved in the squad in that environment. He's still very young and a quality player, but I wouldn't experiment. I think you've got to pick the fittest, strongest available team that you have for the weekend and try and win a series here, because this will be in the memory bank going to Japan next year, and these kind of significant milestones that I've mentioned are very, very important things that you can draw on.